Welcome to this explainer. If you are in His 240, you know we are constantly digging into the complex history of Kentucky, and today we're jumping right into a really profound shift that happened in the 19th century. We are going to explore exactly how a rough, frontier agrarian society completely transformed itself into a highly connected, deeply stratified, and, crucially, slave-dependent capitalist economy.
You know, to really get a grip on the 19th century, we've got to look way past just memorizing lists of dates and names. We need to step back and ask ourselves a much higher-level historical question. How did this massive economic and social metamorphosis actually happen? How did a society that was literally just focused on basic survival suddenly become entirely driven by the pursuit of capitalist profit?
So, to figure that out, our historical analysis today is going to follow this exact transformation arc. First, the arrival of the market revolution. Second, the conquering of geography. Third, the rise of capitalist agriculture. Fourth, the reality of a slave society. And fifth, the emergence of extreme wealth and gentility.
Section 1. The market revolution arrives. The real economic catalyst that changed absolutely everything was the state's massive shift away from a local barter system and straight into a paper-driven market. Think about the 1856 Northern Bank of Kentucky note, for instance. Early Kentuckians were basically just trading pelts and crops to get by. But the Panic of 1819 exposed just how utterly unprepared the state was for these new financial realities. The rise of banks that followed finally provided the crucial paper currency needed to fuel a true commercial revolution. Suddenly, money wasn't just a tool for simple trade anymore, it was all about investment and capital.
Section 2. Conquering geography and the infrastructure boom.
Okay, but to generate real, lasting wealth, this new capitalist society first had to overcome a massive hurdle: the state's incredibly rugged geography. The absolute prerequisite for commercial dominance was infrastructure, so Kentuckians poured millions of dollars into three key transportation pillars. First, there were turnpikes, which were ridiculously expensive and often had to be funded by public lotteries and private tolls. Second, you had the adaptation of shallow-hull steamboats to master those treacherous river systems, which basically turned towns like Louisville into booming, wealthy ports almost overnight. And finally, the railroads, which promised to definitively connect the Commonwealth to massive national markets.
To put this infrastructure boom into perspective, just think about Albert Fink's colossal iron bridge spanning the Green River for the L&N Railroad. We're not talking about some simple country road here. This was an absolute marvel of engineering. It represents millions of dollars of capitalist investment designed to literally bend the natural environment entirely to the will of commerce.
Section 3. Capitalist agriculture and the industry boom.
Right, so with all that infrastructure finally locked in place, a true economic boom took off across the state, bringing with it a fundamental shift in mindset. Instead of mere survival, farming became this intense capitalist pursuit of profit. Families started transforming inherited land into massive business enterprises. Hemp was grown specifically to feed the national cotton industry. Livestock was being scientifically bred for distant, high-paying markets. Even your standard corn crop was transformed into bourbon, becoming a highly profitable value-added export. Every single sector was suddenly optimized for maximum capitalist return.
Section 4. A slave society and the human cost.
Now, as historians, we really have to pivot here and confront the dark, agonizing underbelly of this entire revolution. There are some historical myths out there that try to frame Kentucky's version of enslavement as somehow mild, while the reality was profoundly different. This capitalist boom rapidly accelerated the brutal commodification of human beings. Make no mistake, slavery here was a system of absolute, violent control, maintained through incredibly restrictive laws and endless toil in fields, in factories, and in homes.
Perhaps the most chilling metric to come out of this era is this number: 77,000. Because the local demand for agricultural labor in Kentucky was actually a bit lower than in the deep cotton states, white Kentuckians sought a financial return on their so-called investments by participating heavily in the internal slave trade. Between 1830 and 1860, they tore countless families apart, selling nearly 77,000 enslaved humans down the river to the deadly, grueling plantations of the Deep South.
When you read primary source newspaper clippings from slave traders of the era, men like Louis Robarts, the truth of this economy is just glaring. Human beings were literally treated as liquid capital. Enslaved people actually became Kentucky's most conspicuous and obviously most tragic export. It was a practice that deeply embedded the state into the incredibly brutal, profit-driven national slave economy. Section 5. Wealth and gentility and a rigid class divide.
So this massive, sudden influx of capitalist wealth ended up completely fracturing the early equality of the frontier. A rigid, highly visible class divide emerged. The upper class, who were funded entirely by these agricultural empires and enslaved labor, really sought to distinguish themselves from everyone else. They sparked a massive consumer revolution, building grand brick estates, commissioning fine, expensive portraits like the famous depictions of Priscilla Hale Calmes, and buying up imported luxuries just to prove that high culture did indeed exist west of the Appalachians.
There's a really telling quote from the era that goes, "God must be prospering you if you can have a silver teapot and sugar dish." That pretty much hits the nail on the head, right? The ultimate markers of success in this new, highly stratified society were no longer just about owning some land and surviving the winter. Success now meant the conspicuous, undeniable display of wealth, refinement, and expensive consumer goods.
As you synthesize all of this history for your class, I want to leave you with a pretty crucial, provocative question to chew on. How do we actually reconcile this history? How was the elegant Athens of the West, with its beautiful portraits, scientific agriculture, and soaring architecture, built directly upon the agonizing foundation of a commodified human slave trade? It is a deeply complex contradiction, sitting right at the very heart of the 19th century market revolution. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.